Good afternoon, ladies. Oh, thank you. Do you know how hard it is to get 148 women to sit on their tables? I was just observing when I came in the room, there was a bit of silence and the decibel noise just went off the Richter scale, and that was even before we had a champagne or a wine. So I'm really looking forward to this afternoon. So good afternoon and welcome, a big warm welcome to each and every one of you. My name is Robin Sarana. I'm the General Manager for Private Banking. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today. I'd like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Well, 2023, ladies, we're back. And I'm sure a bit like me, it just feels like we're rocketing out of the gates in 2023. And I was only talking to my team yesterday and said, you know, when we came back in January 2022, we went, oh my God, I've got to do this to-do list, you know, catch up on all the things that we missed out in COVID. But the beginning of 2023 feels really, really different. And probably like you, it's just really rocketing and accelerating, and I just can't wait to see some of the incredible things that collectively we're going to be able to achieve as a community of women, both in our professional lives and our personal lives. We have a big warm welcome to Anne Sherry, to our guest honour today of Tool Leader 2022. We've also got our Tool Leader Sam Mostyn. Where's Sam? So Sam. See, Sam's not listening to my instructions. And along with, we're also joined today by Professor Deen Sanders as well. It's going to be exciting to hear about, obviously, the stories of 2022, but also to hear about this Women Leaders Study Tour and what's ahead of us for 2023. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday, feel rested, and on behalf of Commonwealth Bank, we're really, really proud to be supporting the Trans-Tasman Business Circle and to bring together these events, but more importantly, to bring together so many incredible women into one room to have meaningful conversations. I look forward to hearing about the insights and the perspectives of everyone who attended the last tour. The topics so pertinent to our growth, to this economy, to our future families and generations of reconciliation, sustainability, innovation, and other critical topics that we so often hear about. We now know more than ever our future leaders will require authenticity, just being me, just being you, empathy and plenty of courage, and challenge the status quo and leave a generation and a legacy for those to come. I'm very excited, as I said, to hear your thoughts, your insights on these important matters, and I hope you leave the room today feeling incredibly energised with your spirits and souls fueled. I look forward to connecting with you all, and thank you. And we're now going to serve entree, and you will hear from the panel very shortly.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oh my gosh, look at you beautiful women. It's so wonderful to have you all here. I'm very excited for today. My name is Tanya and I'm the Chief Executive of the Trans-Tasman Business Circle. And before I commence, I would like to acknowledge the original custodians of Australia and pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We acknowledge and celebrate all First Peoples of this land and their enduring connection to country, centuries of resilience and ongoing contributions. I would also like to warmly welcome all First Nations people here with us today. We are thrilled to welcome you. Is it working? Yeah. We are thrilled to welcome you all here to our Special Women Leaders by the Circle luncheon. And it is absolutely great pleasure, because these women are so busy, that we greet and thank our amazing guests of honour, Anne Sherry and Sam Mostyn. And of course, our very special guest of honour, a late arrival, Professor Deen Sanders, AOM. Thank you, Dean, for being with us at such short notice. Welcome, of course, to some of our 2022 study tour cohort joining the panel discussions. We've got Marianne Perkovitz, Leila Najah Hibri, Yatu Hunt, Carolyn Frank and Sally Reid. You'll hear from them later. Thank you to CBA. amazing. CBA Private for hosting us. To Robin and your team for always being there for us. It's such a pleasure to work with you. This is not the first time we've done this and definitely not the last. Your support is invaluable. We couldn't do it without you. And we thank you for bringing us all together today. Last time we did it, we were half the room. So we're getting bigger and better. Thank you. I also want to pay tribute to our sister organisations. There are representatives here from Future Women, CEW and Globe Women. You do phenomenal work, and we are working with you as we go into this new world in our circle journey of bringing women together under a new brand, which I'm just about to tell you about. So I also want to thank Marianne Perkovitz. I really want to shout out for Marianne. You do so much for all of us. You keep us... You're just always there. You're like an angel that always appears. Thank you, Marianne. And I want to thank two of the men that stand with me. My business partner of 30 years, Johnny, and my life partner, Glenn. I love having you on this journey with me, so thank you. And then, of course, welcome to the most phenomenal group of women, and that's all of you here today. Such a diverse group of female leaders representing so many organisations. It is truly an honour to have you here. To our alumni of study tour delegates in the room from our past 3 study tours, and of course to those of you as guests here to find out a bit more. So what a room. Today is a monumental day for the Circle for many reasons, and given there is a lot to get through, I'm going to go as fast as I can. So today we launch our 2022 Outcomes Report. Today we officially launch our 2023 Women Leaders Study Tour. And today, and most importantly, we launch our newest initiative, Women Leaders by the Circle, a place for a place for she, her. I really got that wrong. I should say it again. Sorry. A place for she, her, they, them. In the months ahead, you will see a full program of engagement across the region. The Circle is committed to promoting skills and leadership for women leaders across Singapore, Australia and New Zealand. And with over 30 years experience in growing collaborative communities across these 3 countries, we will foster female leadership in key organisations across business, government, not-for-profit and academia. So watch this space and please join our journey. Oh, and one more thing, proud Jewish mama moment, but my son is getting married on Sunday. So our outcomes report. We set ourselves a high bar for this, our 3rd Women Leaders delegation. Sam Mostyn set the vision. She was amazing in setting the focus for the tour, to build a holistic program that was challenging and interwoven. We carefully curated every speaker, every location and every experience to balance discussion with time, to reflect on the challenges, grieve over what's already been lost and celebrate what can be achieved by people who step up together. We prioritised being as inclusive as possible. We offered financial support to delegates who needed it, and we called on our networks to maximise the reach of our invitation. So I have a lot of people to thank. Sam, you led us, inspired us, walked with us, shared with us, and lifted us. The personal journey you took us on is life-changing, and having the privilege of spending the week with you is unforgettable for all of us. We couldn't have taken on such a huge topic, attracted the calibre of delegates and presenters that we did without you at the helm. To our brilliant and generous advisory group, Ayala, Dale, Rosanna, Erin Marie, Anne and Susan. Thank you for sharing your passion, ideas, contacts and time as we built the program. Your efforts were invaluable. Thank you to all our speakers and everyone who warmly hosted us in Melbourne and the Yarra Valley. To Susan Beeston, who unfortunately couldn't be with us here today, and her team at Capgemini, our primary sponsor. And to my tireless and incredible team of young, talented female leaders. And most importantly, I wanted to thank our incredible group of delegates. Each and every one of you have inspired me with your courage, your tenacity, your personal stories and your professional victories. I was so humbled and honoured to be among you, some of the most amazing women I've ever met, and the ongoing close connections we have all made that continue to be stronger and richer. So we love making magic happen. We love changing lives, and I've been blown away by watching our Women Leaders Network grow. We all walked in as strangers and walked out alongside each other, becoming champions, change makers, colleagues and friends over the months that have followed. We promise to explore new models of leadership in these delegations, but our women leaders are creating them instead. So what's not to love about that? So in closing, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion, and we'll now hand over to Sam, who will share an overview of last year's 2022 Women Leaders Study Tour. Sam Mostyn. My beautiful Sam.
Well, there's nothing like following Tanya Oziel to a stage. You're extraordinary, Tanya, and I'll say more about you in a moment. Of course, it's always inspiring to be on Gadigal land, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respects. I'd also like to acknowledge we have a number of First Nations leaders in the room, and I'd like to acknowledge their presence. And just one comment, and this won't surprise the women that were on the 2022 tour. We have a big year ahead of us where we're being asked to do something as citizens of this country at a referendum. And I'm not here to tell you how to vote in a referendum. I just thought it would be important to share the fact that I intend to vote yes. But that's because from the moment those dialogues were underway leading up to the dialogues at Uluru, often led by extraordinary women leaders, I've been listening to what is being asked of us as citizens, whether First Nations or otherwise. And on the tour, we spent a lot of time discussing that at the personal level. And as I said, I'm not suggesting you have to vote one way or another, but when you go into that ballot box, I'd like to think that, as Pat Anderson AO has said, you go in with your conscience. You're well briefed, you've done your work, you've thought about this, you've got the knowledge you need so you can make an active choice as a citizen of this country, concerned about our future and understanding our past. And as women leaders, I think that's something that we just have to think about and talk to our communities who maybe don't have access to information. They're the dinner table, kitchen table conversations, and they're the conversations we had on the 2022 tour. And I think there's lots of men's voices in this that are worth listening to, but I'm particularly attracted to the voices of the women like Pat Anderson, Sally Scales, Tanya, Professor Megan Davis, but all those First Nations leaders who are educating us on what that referendum is about. So just get yourself skilled and talk about this with your friends and families, because it will matter during 2023. Now, Tanya has asked me to say a few words about the tour, and in fact, I'm going to leave that for the panel we're going to have and to hear that in the words of some of our delegates, because I can't do it justice. And in the remarks I've put at the opening pages of our report, I've tried to say what I would say to you if I had time to stand here for much longer than 5 minutes. And it started in this room in a lunch like this when a week before we set out. And I can see the faces of a number of the women who I first met in this room a week before we met at Melbourne Airport and got on our electric buses and headed into the country. In that room on that day, the women that were coming, it staggered me that so many women stood up to introduce themselves, not just with humility and grace, which was the mark of all of the women on that tour, but with a sense that they didn't deserve to be there, and that the other delegates were probably more important and doing more important things. And so almost every woman stood up and said, I'm feeling humble because of all the amazing women, and I haven't done very much, and I'm a bit worried that I haven't done enough to be here. And that went on during the lunch, and I kept thinking, what is it we do to ourselves when we play small and don't have the confidence to say, actually, I'm here in my full self, I'm proud of what I've done. It's the equal of anything anyone's done, and in my view, I'm doing the best I can as a woman, and I want to be proud of that. And I guess the way I'd sum up the tour is that the same women who might have said that at the beginning of the tour, by the end, were fully formed, great, strong, powerful women who I think were not just unleashed by that program, but felt backed by every other woman on the program. And if I could share with you the WhatsApp chat that has gone on since we said goodbye to each other at the end of the tour, it is extraordinary. The successes women have had, the holding each other's backs and spirits and being there for each other. That WhatsApp chat line is just an incredible testament to what a tour can do, about the relationships of trust, supporting one another, looking for opportunities for each other when women have been in trouble, getting right in there and saying, what can we do to help you and get you through this? And being that quiet set of very powerful supporters that give women confidence when often you can't find them in the public sphere. So that was the kind of change that happened across the tour. But of course, we were looking at sustainability issues, and the only way we got through that tour with the level of development personally was because of Tanya, her advisory team and her crew. Because you said it very lightly, Tanya, that you had to curate something because of the expectations we were setting. But my goodness, I have never been on a tour that has had so much focus on the right people in the right moment in our rooms, listening to us and then providing support for us. It was remarkable. I'd just like to say thank you to Tanya, to the team who supported her, and the advisory group. And it will be the same for Anne, whatever Anne wants to do with the tour, however difficult, complicated, how hard it will be, this group of women will make that happen. And it is truly remarkable. So I think we went on a journey together in 2022. I will never forget being on a standard electric domestic bus that doesn't bend, going up and down mountains, feeling a little bit car sick because we didn't have seat belts, and the women who went on this will know why. But that was because we committed to a carbon neutral travel plan, and there weren't carbon free coaches that were luxurious. We were doing it old school, and we were bonded by those moments. At every event we went to, whether it was in rooms like this or in smaller venues, we wouldn't allow food waste. So every woman would be collecting the food at the end of the event and making sure that that food was not thrown out, because of a conscious decision that we were not going to live and behave in a way on this tour that wasn't consistent with what we were challenging ourselves as leaders to take back to our worlds about sustainability. I'm not going to go through all of the things that happened, other than to say on the final day in Melbourne, when we wrapped up, we were able to do some work to show the collective power of this group of women. And we looked at it through number of employees affected, revenue that's generated, people you touch, and the numbers were staggering. And I don't think we'd thought about that at the beginning of the tour, but by the end, we were thinking about collective action and power together with men. This wasn't just about women by ourselves, it was about building the kind of relationships across the country that would see real and tangible change that we could help lead. And the numbers are in the report about just what we managed to, I guess, bring together and convene. And I'm sure that will be the case for the 2023 tour. So what I'd like to do is also say that because of tours like this, the role of women in this country is beginning to matter more and more. So when I meet with treasurers, I'm sure, Anne, it's the same with you, when I meet with people who are pulling the levers on what will really drive equality for women, equality for all women, with special focus on First Nations women, migrant women, refugee women who've just arrived, women driving our community, those men, particularly who are holding the levers of power, listen to women like us. They're now up for the discussion about what it will take to build a gender equal Australia, what they have to do in policy setting, what they have to do in their budgets and in their policy priorities, and how they put women and girls at the front of discussions about policy. And the reason they're doing that is they're hearing from all of you in your respective roles as leaders. It's come about because of a collective set of actions. And I just want to say that it has an impact, and never be frightened about the fact that your take on this, when you're talking to those that do hold those powerful roles, that it really matters and gives them confidence to step up and make big change. And that's why we've seen billions of dollars invested in early education and care, in childcare. It's the reason we've got a paid parental leave scheme that's growing and encouraging more men to take care and to support women into the non-caring industry, so that we can have brilliant careers, long lifetimes, that are financially secure, and not ending up in that terrible statistic of the fastest growing impoverished people in Australia being women over 50. And so we have good work to do, and we're going to be impactful, and that's what the tour does. And for those of you thinking about it who have signed up for 2023, you come out of it just with this enormous energy and support group, and anything is possible. And to show you how that actually happens, I'm really pleased to be inviting to the stage 3 of our tour delegates. We could have invited all of the tour delegates up, but we've had to choose 3 so we can give you a sense of, for those who weren't on our group. But Yatu Hunt, General Manager at Cox Inall Ridgeway, Leila Naja Hibri, Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Fashion Council, and Caroline Franklin, Associate Director of Sustainability at Oxford Economics. So I'm getting to join us. Yes, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. We'll get the other 2 fixed. Ollie, you've got a microphone. I was a microphone. I just want to ask each of you to reflect on what happened to you through the tour, your reflections on that time together, things you might have thought about subsequent to the tour, and things that might help women who are thinking about joining 2023, just about what happens on a tour of this kind.
Can you hear me? Yeah. For me, it actually was a transformational tour. The concept of people, planet, and profit as a sustainable leadership approach has been very much on my mind. I had been thinking for a while about how we need to I believe, transform the way we do business and potentially even the way we do life in a very different way. That the values we probably all have not been translated to our everyday life in the way that I, wanted to see for my children and hopefully one day for our grandchildren. And this tour, when I read and Rosanna sent me this, I was in a very tough moment actually in my life, work-wise and other ways. And Rosanna said, you have to come to this, Layla. And I thank her every day because I actually call this group, this tour, the gift that keeps on giving. And I mean this. I have had so much support, love, friendships, existing friendships that have grown, and new friendships, and also like some connections and that have surpassed my imagination. And my most passionate, the thing that I'm most passionate about is women in leadership, and giving women their right space in the world. And I feel that we got so close and we talked so hard and so courageously about this issue. I think we have a long way to go, but I think Sam, your leadership of that tour was phenomenal as well. So I feel very privileged to have been there. Thank you.
Well, I think it was more to do with the women themselves. So I was just the lucky person at the front of the bus. So, but thank you. Yatu, for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was an absolutely incredible experience. I hadn't initially intended to go on the tour, but I met the wonderful Tanya, and I think within about 10 minutes, she just said, well, that's it. You're coming. And for those who know Tanya, that's just what happens. I'm also a descendant of the Anawandangari peoples of northwestern New South Wales, and I think one of the threads through the conversation was around how we can embed First Nations thinking in business, and how much, not, just we have to learn, but how much we can also make space for First Nations leadership on issues around diversity and inclusion, sustainability, a lot of the conversations on topics that we were having across the tour as well. One of the things that, I have grappled with and thought a lot about, particularly working in an Aboriginal business, is around ensuring that First Nations thinking about DEI or CSR are not sidebars to business. And I work in creative services, and we talk to a lot of brands and retail clients saying this can't just be something that you do, it must become part of who you are. And that is a very significant nuance. And I think a lot of the conversations that we had actually explored what that means in a business context. And the one speaker from that tour that has always stayed with me is Aubrey Blanche, who worked at Atlassian in the United States. So now she's, made me into a monster. I ask everybody, what's your DEI budget per head count? If you say it's a business priority and it's unfunded, it's not a business priority. So these are the kinds of questions that, I've certainly been asking, and I think it's forced a lot of conversations about how we embed these things meaningfully in not just how we create policies or develop infrastructure, but how we actually see the world. So having the space to have those conversations, and there was another Aboriginal business on the tour as well, which was wonderful to connect, and we hope we can encourage more First Nations women and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander owned businesses to be part of the 2023 tour as well, because when we come together, great things happen and we can change the nation, and I too will be voting yes.
Before I come to you, Karen, I just thought I'd pick up on Aubrey, because that was indicative of having absolutely the global expert join us, who said to us, if you are not putting people of colour, non-binary people, people with disability, if you're not thinking at those that suffer the most disadvantage across our community as central to what you do, then you're effectively ableist, racist and sexist. And to have someone actually sort of say that to you as a group of people leaders saying, we thought we were doing okay, it was that level of conversation and taking us on about our own world beliefs, and it was quite remarkable, that session, because we had to really, really dig deep and think about what does good look like, and I think it impacted all of us. I'm looking at Rhonda Brian Hall here, who is a leader of this work on what it means to belong. And I thought of Rhonda in that moment around the belonging story. And we're no longer about inclusion and diversity. We're talking about who belongs in our worlds. And Rhonda leads that work sensationally. Caroline, tell us about what happened for you.
I'm hoping it's perfect. I think firstly, I wasn't quite sure where to start. I think firstly, it was great getting a little pep talk from you just now, because to be honest, I'm nervous sitting up here. And I think that reminded me wholeheartedly of what that tour did. It was amazing to be able to have the power, not the power, the confidence to speak up, to question. And what I've loved about that, this is all from a personal point of view, but what I've loved about that is I've then had the power to go back and question at work. I sat in a room on an away in Amsterdam with 100 business development people, and the top 10 salespeople went up. It was all men. And I said, well, what are you doing? Why is this all men? I don't believe it's because the women are any less good. And it finally got people to think about, okay, how are we judging people, or how are we kind of quantifying this? It was done on, I was like, women work part-time, account for that, put it against their targets. Don't just do it on who's the top seller. And that I thought was fantastic. I think from a broader piece, less just on me, it was amazing getting the opportunity to ask questions that I didn't know were okay. Questions around how we interact. It was amazing having Yatu on the tour, where I could kind of say, well, is it okay to ask this? I don't know whether I can ask kind of how that's going to be responded, and just it's okay to ask, and that curiosity that you can bring. And it's okay to be curious, as long as when you make a mistake, you acknowledge it and move on. And there were some people that, I was brought to tears in one of the sessions with Molly. Yes. Because I think just people go through the same experiences, and the second that you tell your story, which I think was something else I brought back from that tour, if you know someone else's story, you get an affinity with them. You can't hate someone when you know their story, and I 100% agree with that now.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I was thinking of Molly as you were talking. Molly is a non-binary young leader, not so young anymore. I think they'd say they're now getting a little bit older, doing extraordinary work on citizen development for young people at the Foundation for Young Australians. And Molly sat with us and talked about what it means to be non-binary, having transitioned from identifying as a woman to identifying as non-binary. And I think it was that conversation and our slipping up of language, the slipping to she rather than they, and I was guilty of that, thinking I was pretty good but not. And so there were moments where we were caught and had to think about what does it take to actually incorporate the current world in our thinking, and not go over it once lightly. And Tanya, you said it up here that the name of this group is for she, her, they, them. That came as a direct response to Tanya thinking about what does that mean for those people that would like to either identify as women who have transitioned, or those that don't identify as man or woman but are welcome in this community. And that was a very important moment, and I think to take it into your organisation and make it part of the name of the new group just says how change happens. So it's a big shout out to you about they, them being as important as she, her. So just so people know, that's what Tanya was talking about. And that came, I think, a lot from those conversations with people like Molly. So fantastic. We've got very little time before we have to hand over. And I wondered maybe if you felt there was something you wanted to say, or a moment that you would wanted to share that would help anyone who's thinking about going on 2023 tour, just that would be inspire that, or just something that's happened. You've probably done it already in some of the remarks, but things that would be worth just sharing with the group while we've got the stage.
I'll share one thing. I'm very proud to say that as a result of this getting together with this group, I met an amazing woman who will be now embarrassed because we're pointing at her, Marianne Perkovich. And we had a few conversations, and she's now accepted or taken over the role of the chair of the Australian Fashion Council. And I feel, I just feel there's going to be more of this, like this group, this network brings together. And, Yatu is on the board of the Australian Fashion Council already. So that was already, we had that connection. We have Rosanna, who's worked with us so closely, Mary Lou Ryan. But anyway, everyone else, I keep meeting these women and thinking, oh my God, if you were, part of the board or on this advisory committee, you could do this for our industry. I'm looking for big change, a huge transformation, a just transformation. within this industry that I work in. And I feel like with this type of caliber of people around, it's inevitable to happen. So yeah, that's my little spiel.
Thank you, Leila. Yeah.
I think it was Tanya that actually mentioned it earlier when or maybe it was you, Sam, on the last day in Melbourne when we actually counted how many boards are we on, how many people do we work in partnership with, how many stakeholders do we have, what kind of ripple effect we can have when we decide to make change. And I thought it was very profound on the last day that we were together. We were talking about what should we gift Sam, and we decided to accept the Uluru Statement from the Heart and pledge to bring that into our workplaces and our conversations. And now it will be a beautiful thread through the next study tour. But when you think about the ripple effect that people can have in their spheres of influence, I think collectively making decisions together, even though we work in very different industries and in different sectors and move in different circles and come from different backgrounds, we can unite over big decisions that will reshape Australia, I believe, in a really positive way. And we just don't often have the space or time to take 7-8 days out of life to think about these things and, percolate. And I remember speaking to one of the staff and I said, why are we so busy? Why are we having dinners? And they said, because you'll all just think you're so busy, you'll be on emails. Like, you can actually take 7 days out to think about things, because that investment will have a much bigger impact in the long run. And just having space and time, I think, was an absolutely beautiful thing without agenda, and agendas grow from relationships.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Caroline.
I don't really know, other than if you've got any doubts, just do it. I agree with Leila. It genuinely changed my career path, not more than, no, so much more than my career path. It's changed everything I want to get out of my future and the future way I work with people. I think if you've got any doubts about asking your whoever it is that signs off on your budget, do it. I never thought I'd get approval for it. We don't ask for enough, just do it. And if they don't, then think of something else. I think really get on it. It's so good.
Perfect. Perfect. and thank you and of course you'll hear this, but there are ways to ensure people who don't have access to the funds that would make it possible to come are also offered opportunities to join through a scholarship type support from the team. If we had asked any 3 women, I can see so many of them around the room who are on the tour, you would have had a similar but different set of reflections, but no less deep and meaningful. And I want to acknowledge the women in the room who could have come up here and shared that with you. But we've had 3 that I think have captured exactly what we all felt. Before we thank them, I just want to say one thing about Anne Sherry. Because Anne Sherry, you'll meet, if you don't know already, I can't believe anyone in this room does not know or admire Anne, but Anne is leading the tour for 2023. And if there's one person that I talk about in my journey, from being a young woman, unsure of myself and whether to say yes to things, the person who got me there was Anne Sherry. And I tell the story often that I was able to call Anne as a young executive. We barely knew each other. We were in each other's orbit, but not enough for me to ring and ask what I did. And I said, I've got this dilemma. Can I talk to you about it? And she said, come to my office now. And I remember walking up to Martin Place to your office and you gave me an hour and you told me what to do. You armed me with and Anne Sherry will be one of the most remarkable leaders and women to lead a tour. And I just bask in her glory because I learnt most of what I do now from the leadership of Anne. So there's a lovely continuity, but I wouldn't be here without you, Anne. And I just wanted to make that clear to all of you when you meet Anne, can't do it without you. So let's thank our panel, and then main course is being served, and then we pop into 2023 to hear about the exciting plan ahead. Thank you.
Sam, thank you. That was great. Thank you to the panelists. Hope you've all enjoyed your wonderful lunch. And now it's an incredible pleasure to introduce Anne. And what an honour that you are one of the busiest women around. You've made time for us. You battled the flight cancellations from Brisbane last night, but in true Anne Sherry style, you always show up. So thank you. So Anne Sherry AO, Chair of UNICEF Australia, Enero Group, the Port of Townsville and Queensland Airports Limited, Chancellor of Queensland University of Technology and a Non-Executive Director of NAB, and our 2023 Study Tour Leader. So the study tour will comprise of 50 women and non-binary leaders from diverse backgrounds and sectors. We will examine and accelerate progress on some of the key topics facing us. We are going to explore new models for leadership and arm you with insights, understanding and networks to navigate and accelerate into a more sustainable, inclusive and equitable future. And of course, we will highlight inclusion and diversity. Given, of course, what we've heard before, the significance of Ullaru's statement from the heart, the program will commence in Uluru, where we are hopeful that Megan Davis will join us. We will continue to Sydney and conclude in Canberra. So great public-private engagement in Canberra. We will walk side by side with and together with the original owners of our land, and the week's program will include visits to community and feature a mix of esteemed First Nations, Australian and global thought leaders, presentations and site visits. We will curate the program to challenge you to unpack current ways of leading and thinking and embrace the opportunity ESG presents to boards and C-level executives. And you will be encouraged to share your own perspectives and contribute towards critical thinking, collaboration and research with an outcomes-based approach. You are here today because you are curious, and I say this study tour and I say just join this study tour, for they are now recognised as an excellent pathway to leadership development for female executives, and we now are proud to say over 250 women leaders from across business, government and non-profit sectors have participated in the program. Also introducing our advisory group for 2023, we've got Dale, Yatu, Marianne, Susan, Teresa and Chelsea, which is wonderful. We meet every week, we build the program together, and every 3 weeks we come back to Anne and say, this is what we've got. And she'll go, yep, no, amazing, do it. What about this? So we've got a great process in place where there's full engagement in developing the program. I really want to thank all previous leaders, Sam Mostyn, Pip Marlowe, Antonia Watson and Naomi Simpson, who have brought us to this point. So Anne, over to you, your turn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. And could I start by making the microphone fall over? Also acknowledging and paying respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and thank them for their custodianship and the lessons we can all learn if we're prepared to engage and listen. And I also declare that I am voting yes. However, what we're talking about, I'm probably the least prepared speaker because everyone else has been on one of these and done it, and I haven't. But I am helping frame up something that I feel really passionate about, which is, I think as leaders, we need to be part of reimagining and redesigning the Australia we want for the future. The Australia that we know we can be, and to learn about the bits of it that we hear about, we think about, maybe we do a bit of, but we don't necessarily engage more broadly in the subject matter or get outside our own spheres of influence. And we were talking earlier about, you know, if you spent 30 years in one industry, you end up seeing the world often through the prism of your learning in that industry. And you might meet other people socially and do other interesting things, but you don't engage on what do you do in this industry, in your industry, that's completely different to what I do in mine? How do you engage with people who think differently, who bring different ideas to the table? And those of you who've jumped industries, as I have, you know you turn up in a new place and you go, oh, you know, I've got to learn a new language. There's a new dialect for this sector that I didn't even speak in my last job. They think differently about customers, the world. But you don't get that often. It's not that easy to do. So I guess I'm thinking about this as Sam has really very aptly described it as a leadership journey. all of us get opportunity to develop our leadership. Much of it is done in very traditional ways. You know, you go to a program, a whole lot of people stand up and talk at you for 3, 4, 5, 7 days. Maybe you go visit somewhere else, but not much. But it's largely about people bringing knowledge to you. You sit there and work out what you do with it, and maybe you synthesise it with the people around you. Even if you go offshore, that's how it's largely delivered. Whereas what we're thinking about is leadership in the 21st century, leadership in 23 and beyond, actually requires so much more than that. And all of our organisations are looking for more. They're looking for people who can think differently, who can put themselves in the shoes of others, whether they're their customers or people who are working in your organisation or people you deal with every day. They're looking for people who are literate around the big social issues of the day, which quite frankly, most of our leaders aren't. They read it in the Fin Review, you know, that particular interpretation of it, or they might read a paper that comes from somewhere, but they don't understand it. They haven't felt it. They haven't touched it. And I've been on a number of board trips, for example, where, and one that we did last year, we went to Darwin and we went out into Aboriginal communities in Northern Australia. There was not a single other person on my board who had ever been into an Aboriginal community. And I think I suddenly had that moment thinking, wow. And we had a conversation about the fact that even though they've read a lot, thought a lot, they actually don't, most of them do not know an Indigenous Australian. So I've got this test that I used to do. It really irritates people. I won't do it for you today, but have you ever had dinner with it? Have you ever had someone in your home for dinner who is an Indigenous Australian, I say to people, and everyone looks at their feet, because the answer for 90% of people is no. And some of that's just about where you live, your social networks. But our world shouldn't be like that if we're looking to create an Australia that is inclusive, that understands the absolutely fundamental role First Nations people have played in keeping Australia safe and secure for tens of thousands of years before any of us ever turned up. All that acknowledgement doesn't come naturally to any of us. So that's one piece of the sort of future that I think about. How do we become an Australia that is really inclusive of that piece of our history, but also inclusive of all the other people who don't fit our, you know, strong norms of leadership, whether that's people with disability or different abilities, whether it's people with who come from refugee and immigrant backgrounds more recently, whose language isn't as good as those who've been here for 2 or 3 generations. You know, all of that stuff, all those little pockets of exclusion now make up half our community, you know, a big chunk of our community. So the world of privilege actually gets smaller and smaller. And I don't want to leave an Australia when I disappear that looks more like England than the Australia we want to be. You know, because if you look at parts of the world where that privilege ends up in the hands of a few hundred people, who are called aristocracy in some parts of the world, but here are called business leaders and other things, you don't want that to be the world that's our legacy. And I think, I guess my passion is about reimagining the Australia we want to be, and therefore having the opportunity, which Tanya and her team will do an amazing job of just giving us the opportunity, and Sam and others who were there last year have described, of engaging with people that aren't in our normal day-to-day, of hearing views, personal views from people whose experience is completely different to our individual views, and taking all of that and making it part of a different leadership platform. And then doing that with a gang. So much easier to do stuff with a gang, because then if you're having a bad day, you can ring someone who knows what you're talking about. And so doing that in a way that also helps us learn from each other, because everyone brings different experiences. Everyone has different personal experiences, life experiences, family experiences, and all of us continue to learn. And so I guess that's the, you know, thinking about, and in a way we're extending on the theme that you guys did last year. So I think Sam and the team did a brilliant job last year of pulling all of that together, and we're going to take it, some of those themes, just in a different space or to a different level. Megan Davis, who many of you will have seen, who's, you know, one of the very strong leaders of, and who came out as one of the co-spokespeople from the Uluru Statement, is going to come and be part of it, particularly at Uluru. And she was going to be here today, but she's in New Zealand. But, you know, finding ways of actually having direct contact, and she's keen as well to talk to business leaders. She sits in a university, she's talking to Australia through media, she's part of a big Indigenous connection in Australia, but business leadership is not her natural space. And so actually having a dialogue with someone for whom this is not their natural space either means that there's learning both ways. And I think that's part of the power of this, that we're not passive. We're not having people come in and speak at us. We're going to be part of a learning journey that is active, that's personal, that is life-changing, as we've heard, and also that is about giving us the opportunity to find our individual superpowers, about the things we really care about, the things we can be passionate about. And for all of us, it potentially is something different. But the collective energy around that, I think, is the huge opportunity. So given I'm caffeinated to the hilt and sleep deprived, I could probably speak forever, but I just think the opportunity, and having heard from the previous group, I feel more excited about it, in fact. I think the opportunity for us to be part of creating transformation. We talk about it a lot in our day jobs and we see it happen incrementally, but we all know we need to speed this stuff up. The inclusivity journey has been going, you know, since I started work when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and it's still, you know, a subject that lots of people have to face into every day. There's still harassment, there's still exclusion, there's still jobs that are designed with a particular demographic and gender in mind. You know, all that stuff still happens. There's so much exclusion. And so how do we shift that dialogue? How do we think about the things that really challenge us? I think I love the conversation about if you haven't got D&I in your budget and your objectives, then it's lip service. It's so true. It's so true. It's a bit like, why don't men take parental leave? There's going to be no change in culture around part-time work and maternity leave if men don't take parental leave. All of our organisations give it to them and hardly anybody takes it up. Why not? So those sorts of issues we really just need to unpack a bit more as well. Not that I've suggested that as a subject, but and I think also the power of the network and caring for each other is really important. There's a lot more discussion now about self-care. I think a lot of us during COVID, some did it really well, some didn't do it so well. But I think the idea of also nurturing yourself, we need to take time out to do that. And so much of our days, again, we've sort of gone back to being incredibly busy and stressed and, you know, a million things, lots of demands, too many emails, too many phone calls. A week out like this also is about self-care. It's about reflection. It's about clearing your head of the clutter that really doesn't move the dial at all. It's about filling your head with the stuff that really challenges you to think about what could I be doing differently and how can I look after myself? Because if you don't look after yourself, you'll never get to the end game. So how can I be part of the transformation of Australia? How can I be part of reimagining it? And how can I do that in a way that's self-sustaining? And I think that's the opportunity that we offer if you're interested in joining us in 2023. Thank you. Now, do I have to introduce everyone? No, you're going to do that? Brilliant.
I think that's on. Can you hear me? Does it sound like you can? Fantastic. So welcome everyone. I'm Marianne Perkovic, and I had the great privilege of knowing Tanya for a long time and have been on a number of the trips. And like you've heard from every speaker and a lot of the great people in the room, it was absolutely transformative. I'm on a learning journey for ESG, and I really rocked up thinking I knew everything about it. It's very privileged to work at Commonwealth Bank, and they gave me lots of learning about it. And so I was really, I think, turned up thinking I knew enough to really hold conversations. And from that very first moment that we came off, we started with a smoking ceremony and a connection to country. and wow, totally transformed. You know, my thinking, my leadership, and certainly things that I really admire and aspire to improve my leadership. So we're going to now have a great deal of time, and you'll be able to ask some questions. Very privileged to have this amazing panel. So Sam, who you've heard of and know, and who'll be facilitating the study this year. To introduce just two extra people that you see are new. First, I really want to say thank you to Professor Deen Sanders. So Deen works at Deloitte, and I think his official title is leading the Deloitte integrity practice. And he also founded the Deloitte Indigenous Leadership Team. He's got a strong background in government, financial services. He was awarded Australian Order of Metal in 2017 for all of his services across those fields. And I only texted Deen on Wednesday to be part of this panel. We knew each other from a previous life and have been greatly reconnected through the study of my daughter in reading his report. And so really, yeah, grateful that he had a fantastic week in country and has come. So thank you, Deen. And Sally Reid. So Sally is at Commonwealth Bank. She's the Executive General Manager of Global Client Solutions. She has really strong institutional banking background. Her career in Australia is across CBA, ANZ, Macquarie, and has had time in South Africa across ABSA and Standard Bank, and is an amazing leader, as I said, in the institutional bank. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions. We're really going to pick the brains trust of this group across the themes of reconciliation, sustainability, and innovation. And I was just going to start with Deen. So I know in our work practices, we speak a lot about diversity and inclusion and how diversity and inclusion contributes to business, but really would love to hear your perspective on diversity and inclusion and how we can really embrace it to have better business outcomes.
Thanks, Brent. I'm a bloke about diversity and inclusion. Firstly, I should say and want to thank you all for inviting me to come along. Nanaginyang, one of the people I'm a Warringah man from Worimi country, which is further up north, about an hour and a half up the road, which is where I was when I came from Toongaroos in the market that I But also, I want to acknowledge, that's good you go Banyan, and I want to acknowledge the aunties and sisters in this room. I think it's an important sort of space to be in. And as you probably know, and this maybe goes some way into the D&I conversation, you're a bit of a scary mob. And I say that, by the way, because a little bit of the conversation, I think, around this is our cultural relationships around difference, around the way we incorporate difference in our conversations in Indigenous culture. Because it's quite baffling to us the way we understand this stuff in Western ideas of, as though there are substantive differences in the way we think about the world, when in fact in our culture we often, I was just referencing this earlier, we talk about this idea of same but different. Everybody, all ideas, all things come from similar places, but we talk about same but different. Stories are, yeah, they're different, but similar sort of concepts. But also, just to say, I'll say this so I can get this out of the road and be safer in the conversation, is that in my culture in particular, and certainly in much of our hoodie cultures, we talk about the fact that women are the power of our communities. Women are the centre of our communities. I bring my small stick because he's here to keep me a bit safe, but also because he tells a story about the idea of how women are the centre of our lives. And in fact, just to really anchor it deeply, so significant to the centrality of our existence that women held the law in our culture. Men weren't given the law until women decided we were worthy of that law. And the threats are constantly taken away, whether we take it away or not. But that's just an important part of the story of recognising the power and strength of women in our culture. So I just want to say that because it's a bit baffling to us, frankly, how the other mob got it so wrong. I don't quite get it. I still don't get how it's completely around the wrong way. It makes no sense to us because we aren't trustworthy. That's the whole point about our law systems are about bringing us into responsibility, bringing us into ways of understanding our responsibility. So many of our stories, much of our law, is built around the idea of how we have to be responsible and respond to our obligations for our families and communities, and very minded of them pretty frequently, with other sorts of stories that I won't go into. But I just want to say that's so much what I'm saying in this conversation. On the actual question I think you're asking, I think what I'd like to say on that sort of stage of saying the same but different, when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, even the language of that is unusual for us, because we were just talking earlier about the concepts of belonging, about this idea that we don't distinguish because we belong, but all things belong. You know, the centre of our culture is the concepts of humility, that we are not important, which I think is an interesting sort of alignment to this idea that women in Australia feel as though they must elevate their voice to one of importance, which without creating more trouble than I need to be in, is interesting from a cultural perspective, because we spend our time trying to be humble. That, by the way, it's got us in trouble, as you probably know. Our voices, therefore, are not heard enough, because the centre of our proposition is we are not important. We are no more important than the kangaroo, than the wind, than the grass, than the tree. They are more important than us. And in fact, there's a story, a beautiful story about how human beings were the last to be picked in terms of our responsibilities on this planet. We were not trusted as a whole species amongst the system, because we didn't earn it. We only got it because the kangaroo couldn't carry it and the birds wouldn't spend enough time on the ground. Literally, we got it because we're last in line. So it goes to this idea from an equity inclusion perspective. What do we value? What's important? And I want to put something radical on the table for you to say that for us, the earth, our mother, Nurabara, in my language, is the centre of our existence. She is why we live. Everything comes from her. Everything is about her. Our whole law, our whole systems, our whole identities come from our country. So when I talk about diversity and inclusion, I'm always saying, and so where is the country? Where is the land? Where is the land in this conversation? Why are we just talking about genders or identities or power or authorities? Where is the land in our conversation? So the report that's polluting your tables is an example of this conversation about how do we bring a voice of nature to our conversations for the future of humanity. Not just because we need to respond to things like climate change, but because nature deserves a voice, and our mother deserves a voice in that conversation, and we've never let her in. And she doesn't get invited in from the current systems of corporate systems. Anyway, that's a long way of saying, I want mother in the conversation. I want but I want our earth in the conversation with DI.
And it's such an important perspective. Do you want to jump in?
I just wanted to so thank you. Actually, that was just contextual. Contextual conversations, I think, help you shift, and that was a really powerful contextual conversation. But also, it links the inclusion to sustainability. You know, we know there's an absolute link between exclusion of consideration of things that give us environmental sustainability and the things that give us a current power structure. There actually is a link there. We don't talk about it that much anymore because, I don't know, because we've broken it down into pieces. But I think reconnecting those things which is that if you start with looking after the earth and be humble, you know, and there's a lot of talk about humility, although that's often in a moment rather than in a lifetime. And you link that to same but different, then you pull all of those threads together, which in a way is the reimagining the sort of future that we want, because our kids get it much more clearly than the current crop or young. That it's a much better conversation in younger people than it is in, you know, my corporate circles. And the joy of being on a university campus now, as I find myself in the thick of challenge every single day about things that I've taken for granted for a really long time, even the way I speak and the way I think about those things, and have segmented them really neatly. So I think that connection is a very powerful one, and one that we hope to pull all the way through.
Yep. And the context, and I think taking that learning back into business, because I think on that theme of sustainability should always start with that country. Howard, gets translated, I think, into business and particularly institutions, and by government intervention is then we start talking about carbon emissions. You know, we've got kind of a target of 45% by 2023 and net zero by 2050. And so in, you know, Sally's world, where she works with lots of institutions, I just wanted to really tap into, you know, sharing some experiences of what you're seeing in institutional land, of how, you know, businesses are responding to that.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that there's two core conversations going on. So there's the discussion that we just had here, and then there's like decarbonisation, climate change, as if it's like something completely divorced. And I think for most people in the corporate sector or the institution, it's like the scales are falling from people's eyes just really slowly. So you're kind of being brought into a world that is you're kind of being brought into a world that's got, you know, more around humanity, more around spirituality, more around thinking through that impact on Earth. But you're sitting with corporate structures and language and power bases and the way that you would historically do things. So I'd say there's a very big journey to join those two hemispheres. In terms of like that broader ESG agenda and sort of like on the E side from a corporate and institutional lens, I think it's everybody's pretty much aligned around the requirement to do something around emissions reduction overall. That is a live conversation. It's moved on from you know, the corporate speak, marketing kind of things at the margin, to truly understanding what it will take to do system-wide change, what needs to happen to measure and manage and, you know, do the CapEx and the funding, etc. But we, even in the language we have in business, have a lot of work to do in the accounting standards, in the way that we speak, in the way that we actually work through those kinds of plans altogether. And kind of talked about, you know, needing to do that in context of what is an ambition for Australia. And I think that's a space that corporate Australia is starting to lean into. Like, what do we want to be in the century ahead? And again, more from a sort of a business position necessarily than a human position. But I think we want to be very relevant in the global energy markets, which we already are as oil, gas and coal producers, but we'd like to do that more in the renewable side, more in the hydrogen side, you know, more with that aspect of it. We want to be a world leader in carbon farming. We have a huge role to deal into there from a country perspective, and we have this incredible Indigenous knowledge around the way to manage land in a more responsible fashion that will result in better abatement outcomes of emissions. We want to be the world's food basket, and certainly Asia's. And to do that, we're going to have to, again, on land management practices and the way we think those things through. And we need to be a transition miner. We have to be able to mine the metals and the minerals of the economy. But it's a race in the business sphere. We saw that with the Emissions Reduction Act coming out of the US very quickly. Hydrogen, which was a thing, is less likely as a kind of key core part. Electrolyzers, the factories that were kind of envisaged being here have already kind of packed up their bags before they even started and gone over the ditch. It's core to Australia's comparative advantage. If you do not decarbonise, not only do you land up with terrible emissions outcomes, you also land up with a very expensive energy base. There will not be enough of anything, turbines, solar panels, whatever, to do this quickly. So you're going to have to be first in order to get that comparative advantage. And maybe the last thing is it's critical to your economic security as a country. So all of these things are part of boardroom conversations in terms of how do we play into doing something fast? How do we get there? And how do we do that in a responsible way? And then how do we actually do it in a way that brings these two dialogues together? And I don't even know if we've really worked out how to start that.
Yeah. So Sam, that's a great note to turn to you. So yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, just to respond, particularly in discussions at boardroom, and I know, and you'll have that perspective as well, but also kind of government response in the circles of influence that you are in.
Thank you, and thank you, Deen, very much for setting the context so beautifully. As I was listening to all three contributions, I was struck by something that happened recently. I joined the board of the Climate Change Authority, the federal body that was sort of we didn't hear about for about a decade. For various reasons, but now it's setting targets and taking a very strong view on our role to deal with climate change. And there is another woman member of the Climate Change Authority board is a scientist who is an Aboriginal woman. And I watch her in the discussions trying to do what we were just talking about. So there were all sorts of discussions about just transition. And so the just transition has a phrase in this country that means really how do we get coal miners to be renewable energy experts, and how do we do with communities losing out because we're moving away from fossil fuels. And she stops the meeting every time and she says, sorry, if we don't talk about the land, if we don't talk about people, if we don't talk about Indigenous perspectives on transition, it's not just. It's just a small part of, you're just doing a small part. And you've got yourself also carried up in that that's what it is. You've forgotten what justice is for Aboriginal people, where we sit in the discussion on transition. And then someone will say, well, we'll have a First Nations part of the plan. She says, no, hang on. No, I want you to start with my understanding of science and land and country and have that as part of the way we talk as the Climate Change Authority. Well, I've got to tell you, you've got to see a group of people sitting back going, I'm now so terrified. Because what she's doing is saying this voice has not been at the table. It's not just a side issue. It's not just in the just transition piece. It's a fundamental piece of how we should be talking about the country transitioning and First Nations knowledge and guidance, but also engagement in all the things that you just said, Sally, about being beneficiaries. And she takes the conversation to a level that we would never get to as a board of directors. And you can see for some it's very challenging. And so it's a constant, I think the chair is constantly trying to think, I've got to be much more inclusive. So back to that word of being inclusive, it's a different form of chairing. And so my second point that I think about, and she's going to have you corner out, I'm going to mention Sonia Stewart, who's here at the front. So Sonia is not only the Chief Executive of the Law Society of New South Wales, first woman in that role, certainly first Aboriginal woman in that role, but is the first chair of the Go Foundation, first Aboriginal chair of the Go Foundation, created by two Aboriginal men, Michael O'Loughlin and Adam Goods. Now, when that was created to help with education opportunities for young First Nations kids across the country, the model that was around was nice white people paternalistically trying to take culture away from young people and making them look like me and play the rules that, Deen, as you were saying earlier, about assimilate. And so what had to change at Go was to remove the natural preference of non-Aboriginal people applying a governance frame on education and scholarships, and actually say the way in which Adam and Michael and Sonia conceive of that is Aboriginal run, Aboriginal led and governed, and it is about putting culture at the front of the scholarship and education discussions. And I just think what we're seeing with the young people staying in school, full of culture, full of their own sense of identity, is a much better way to think about education than trying to keep kids in school telling them that their culture doesn't matter, or they've got to be more like the rest of us. And destroying that sense of place and family and kinship. And that only happens because Sonia's the chair, because Sonia controls the whole governance way in which we discuss things. And as a director on that board, I'm learning all the time from Sonia about how to govern differently, and there's skills I don't have. And I learn all the time. And I think we've got to fundamentally ask ourselves in business and in government and boards, who actually sets the tone, who teaches us things. And that's the humility piece. It's stepping back and getting out of the way a bit and learning from different forms of governance. And Indigenous governance is unlike Western governance. But man, it has an outcome that is part of this reimagining how the country could look. And it should never be separate. It should be central and leading. And I'm a beneficiary of that. And I can tell you that I'm a much better director everywhere else I go because of what I learned from Sonia Stewart as the chair of Go. But that's
Well done. Yeah.
Now, that's integrating to what Anne's talking about. And you can't just copy, you can't just, it can't be platitudes. Often we have to get out of the way, is probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah. Now, if anybody wants to ask a question, we've got microphones roaming, so please put your hand up. We'll continue the conversation as you're thinking. I'll keep scouring the room, so please do contribute. But I think, Sam, very powerful, and just Anne in, boardroom discussions. And we often, particularly a lot of comments that, Sally made, and then, Dean's reflection, like these conversations, still, aren't going up to boardrooms. And I think what we do here is, the difficulty in measurement and the difficulty in tracking, how businesses are going. So, how are these discussions playing out?
I guess the bank boardroom is the obvious one, given the conversation you were having. But also to Sam's point and the point I made earlier about getting insight. And you can have the conversations in a very tactical and technical way, which we are doing. How do you fund it? Who's doing what? Am I coming and going? I'll share again. Am I coming in? Yeah, thank you. It's obviously got your energy in it. It's coming and going in the boardrooms through a very technical lens and competitive lens. What's happening in Europe? What's happening here? What's happening there? So there's a piece of this which is what's the Australian view of it all, which is we're at the beginning of that conversation. I think what really is our competitive advantage, not just in a financial or even landmass sense. But what else should we know about the land that helps us be the centre of sustainable farming, sustainable food production? Because we sit on knowledge that the rest of the world has long forgotten or long discarded. And we have the advantage of actually cultures who can re-educate the rest of us in how that could work differently. So I'd say those conversations were in early stage. It was the power of taking the board to have some proper conversations on country about the way people think about land and are working with land themselves. And that was, as I said, it was life-changing really for most of the board who hadn't had those conversations ever. So there's something about insight that helps better. We would all understand. Insight helps you make better decisions and have better conversations. So you need more insight. To have more insight, you've got to be open to having a different sort of conversation. Yeah. You've got to have a different conversation that doesn't start with ROI, that it starts back with what are we trying to do here collectively, and what's everyone's role in doing that, and where's your piece of it, and how do you do that in a sustainable way. And I think the idea of sustainability, it's also been sort of pigeonholed into a technical space now, which drives me mental. Because if you're really running a good business, you know that sustainability isn't about something you give a mid-level manager who's called a sustainability manager to do. It's actually the way you think about the next 10, 20, 30 years of your business and the choices you are making every single day. And those choices are about the way you treat your people, they're about the way you treat your customers, they're about the products you produce, make, sell, whatever it is, and the impact those things have, not just tomorrow or the next day, but in the long term. They're about the underlying assumptions that you bring to all of those things in your business that really make it sustainable. So it's actually a big strategy issue. It's not a middle management tagline that you write a page on, or now 50 pages on in your annual report, telling everyone how good you are, when it's not integrated into everything you do, which is why it's so important that inclusion is part of that as well. Because inclusion isn't something you put 5 columns of numbers against in your annual report. It's the way you think. It's a choice you make every single day about who's in and who's out, and who's in and who's out of your hiring, who's in and who's out of your conversations, who's in and who's out of your thought process. All of it rolls in together to be a long-term sustainable future for your business, but also for your community, and also for the Australia that is ultimately our collective legacy. So I just think that mindset shift and the insights that come from that are something that it's a habit all of us have got out.
And I think, Deen, if you want to just add,
I just want to come to that, if I can, a little bit sort of sideways. I do love and appreciate the point about insights. I think that's an important way into the conversation. But one of the things that we think about a lot is, and that's talking about the sister scientist on the board, or Sonia, of course, is that something to be aware of, I think, is that we are changing too. And part of that conversation is that, no, I'll put it a different way. What if everything you have is wrong? What if everything you've been doing and been building and been thinking is wrong? Or at least wrong for this country? And arguably wrong for the world, but I'm not responsible for the whole world. I'll just take this one. So when we think about this idea of what's right for this country, what's uniquely Australian, I love that challenge about the idea of what does Australia have. And we talk about this in, I am in my day job a partner in a professional services firm, so we are interested in how this translates to economic change and corporate change. So there's a conversation going on about things like governance, things like law, things like economics, and about how they are maybe just wrong. And the more we begin to unpack them, the more they don't fit this world and arguably the rest of the world. So what we are doing is we're coming into the conversations with something different. And it makes it sound like it's an insight, but it's not really. It's more of a going back. And the beautiful conversation that you're all having about being on country or being in relationship with each other is what we're really talking about. Is that when you come into a relationship, there's a beautiful story about the board going out on country or you all going out and planning to. It's not actually about being out together, by the way, if I can put that challenge to you. It's about being out on country. It's about being in relationship with the country, because when you're in a relationship with the country, your relationships will transform. That's what happens because the earth is part of that relationship chain. And that's what will transform you. It binds you in different ways. And in our culture, we talk about something like governance, complex organisational systems. I'm responsible, one of my great sins is I'm an architect of some of the corporations law. I pay my sins for that on a daily basis. And I wish I hadn't, frankly, because in my culture, you can't see it. There's a tiny little symbol on here on this law stick. You will have seen it, the circle and the circles that go around, the classic Aboriginal story. That there is a complete system of governance, a complete system of corporations' obligation and responsibilities in 3 single circles. And there's 12,000 pages of Corporations Act, and it still gets wrong every day. That's it. It's in one simple diagram. So much of the conversation is actually about going back. Not complicating things further, not bringing insights into an existing system and trying to change that existing system, but actually going way out of that system, sitting on country for a bit, having a different relationship with each other and seeing a new way through it all. That's the, I think I'm sound like I'm selling the program, but that's the invitation that's there, is to go back and restart the conversations about what it means to be a leader in this country, using the heart of this country for that story. And I'll stop there.
So I was just checking, yeah, very powerful. Thank you, Dean. So is there any, so Binawee? Can I just say thank you to Binawee, who's going to be speaking now, the head of the Indigenous programs at AMP. And so I saw an amazing welcome to country, which Binawee had done. And then with my daughter's study, reached out. Binawee gave us 2 hours and has just, changed my life, as Deen has, very transformational. So thank you for coming and, please ask a question.
First of all, I just want to say, when you're talking, I just feel something that my grandmother wants to speak through me. That's okay. People are a reflection of country. When country is sick, we too will become sick. So it's so important that we start with country. It's so important that we see ourselves in country, on country, because we are all country. So I just wanted to make that point, and also that's something that my grandmother really strongly just wanted to say, that, if we don't take care of country, we're not taking care of ourselves or our future generations. So, that's really important. The next thing I want to say is from me. I don't know if this is temperamental like me, but I'm not. It's from me. And what it's about is it's an invitation to non-Indigenous people to come on this journey with us to protect country, culture and kin. And that's not just ours, that is yours too. Because if you live in this country and you call this country home, it's big enough for all of us, but you too now have an obligation to take care of country. And I believe that through the Squircle effect, I'm designing this program is called the Squircle effect. And it's basically old ways, Aboriginal ways, and new ways coming together to form a new way for our children. So the Squircle effect has to apply when it's Indigenous-led and co-designed by Indigenous and non-Indigenous. So please do apply the Squircle effect. It doesn't matter what role you're in, what industry you're in. It's when Indigenous values and Indigenous ways of being, doing and knowing come into existence. Because Aboriginal people, we've had 250 odd years to conform into this Western world, but yet we still can't. How about you not come for a walk in our world? I bet you'll belong and you'll fit in real quick.
Yeah. Thank you, Binawee. And, you know, I've learnt so much from Binawee, but I do, you know, an amazing learning this week. And I really just want to acknowledge Deen because, you know, we've known each other in financial services and hadn't connected for some time. And I called, you know, contacted him on text, said, Deen, is this still your number? I then explained what. Yeah, I know. I was like, yes, it is. Like, what does she want? I explained what we were doing, and he did move a lot. So really grateful for your wife. And I just said, thank you for giving me the time. And you know what I've really learned from Benny and also Deen is, you know, he said to me, it is my responsibility and accountability to, you know, educate you and be part of it. And Marianne, if this is important to you, then I'm really going to make this happen and be here. And I reflected back on, you know, so many meetings and you cancel and there's people that you try to get into their diaries for years. And to me, you know, I'm going to get quite emotional because to really learn that from the heart of country culture has changed me and the way that, you know, I really divide my time and think about it. So thank you for that. And Deen, I was just going to also, can we reflect on the conversation that we had about our previous life in financial services? Yeah. Okay. So just an example, like we are in such a pivotal moment and at a time where, you know, these discussions are happening, it is really our responsibility to keep them going. I think, look, I'll say it was a decade-ish ago. Deen was in the, you know, Financial Planning Association, and we were working with changing, you know, a lot of these laws that continually change. And I didn't even know that Deen was of, you know, Indigenous background, but he always approached things very differently. And when he was in a system approaching things very different to a very Western capitalist structure, you know, he was always very different. And I think we had this conversation of how we were trying to apply ethics and, you know, the importance of ethics. And the way that he could only communicate that back then was through law, and how different it would have been to be able to have this rich conversation. But do you want to just share the conversation? Yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks, Mary. I think it goes a little bit to the beautiful conversation, Sister, about this idea of we've tried a long time to fit into the systems of this and try to describe and influence and speak and stand up and just to get a corner of a conversation. And it just took me a long time, I've got to admit. I was probably a bit stupid about the fact that I thought the way to success was to be a lawyer, get a PhD, work successfully in corporations, because that's what I was told. The path you're all on, or maybe you've already achieved. The OIM thing, for God's sake, what a ridiculous idea that I've got an OIM. I don't understand how. I still don't know how. I literally don't know how I got that thing. But I thought that was the pathway to success. And people said it was. But my culture kept knocking on the head, literally. And my elders kept saying, look, you've got a job to do, boy, and that's not the job. The job you're doing is not that. So I thought I was being clever, getting qualifications and getting programs of success and looking like I was impressive in the media and the marketplace. And none of it made sense until I began to understand that it's actually the culture I'm speaking through. I'm understanding this world through a different lens. And so when I stopped trying to apply it that way, the reverse way, but it actually made sense. So the point that we're making is that success in this country is not going to come. It's just generally not going to come from more broken structural, you know, power and authority of the Western systems. It's just not going to happen. This country has a different law, a different story, a different relationship with the world. As leaders, by the way, we lead this. Our culture is valued over the rest of the world. It's just not valued here. Now, we are the world's oldest continuous culture. When you're going, we always will be Aboriginal land. Doesn't matter what happens in between. Doesn't matter when I'm dead. I have a responsibility to my future and my signature and my Bulldog and my language, my next 7 generations, as I was saying before. Doesn't matter when I'm gone, this thing will still always be Aboriginal land. So the more we come into relationship with it, and I don't mean this necessarily culturally, I mean through the systems of law, LAW, as well as law, LORE, how we bring those worlds in a way that strengthens you. And the only thing I can say to you, and what I've got to in my stage of life, is I just say, when anybody asks me a complicated question about government or governance, I'm a constitutional lawyer, I'm a regulatory lawyer, I say, you know what, just come on country, we'll have that conversation up there. Because that's where it always changes. I can sit in a boardroom and do that stuff all day, but the conversation changes when we get on country, because the relationship begins from a very different point in that process. So there's a number of colleagues in here who've tried to have meetings with me. You'll never get me. Someone country most of the time, and never really found me, but that's a different story. But I want to reflect for you all that the gift of being on country, no matter what it is, through this program or through others, and that doesn't mean, by the way, travelling to the South of I can be, Uluru is a powerful place, but there's sacred country literally here. This country you are joining on today, just as a small part of the story, you may know this, but this Darling Harbour Space, as it's called, was once burial ground for the Gunnegaon. The sacred country. We built over it with concrete and buildings, but I can still feel it. I didn't explain it, but I will just for a second say that I don't always bring tools into boardroom conversations. I do them when I need the strength of that, because I'm in places that aren't necessarily the right place to be in. This is a place that has all sorts of power. Some of that power is good power, some of that power is not so good, but when you are acculturated and have a responsibility in culture, you feel those differently. And you are feeling it even if you don't know it. So part of our story is how do we help you succeed in this country? We're not necessarily there to voice the table. I'd rather be on country, but we need to help you succeed. We will not succeed as a nation if we don't find a way for you to come into our way of understanding the relationship with this landscape. Then you will be phenomenal. Then this country will be extraordinary, truly, genuinely extraordinary. But it's got to come from a different way of understanding the relationships now.
So we're going to hear is there anyone else that want a question? Okay, so Sam, did you want to make a question? Yeah.
Hello?
Yes.
To the speakers for having us today. An inspiring conversation we're having. My question relates to how much do we lean in to, say, societies or places that have done the work partially, because I think there's still a long way to go. And I'm referring to I'm a Kiwi, so I moved, but I'm an immigrant. So my parents moved to New Zealand when I was 10. And then I identified as a Kiwi for a very long time. And 15 years ago in my adult career, moved here to Australia. So now proudly called myself an Australian. So as a Kiwi, we were always educated in Indigenous people in terms of Māori, and I believe they are a lot more progressive in terms of inclusion and incorporating them in governance. And so coming to Australia, surprisingly, as being such a quite a close culture, but of course a different land, different set of culture, similar in the fact that I'm thinking, oh, it's kind of still different here. There's still a difference that I suppose growing up where that was kind of part of everyday life, being, part of the sovereignty, Treaty of Waitangi, everything was like recognised from the get-go. My university learnings were actually, we were taught in marae and hangi and taken to all those things because it was appropriate and important for people to know about the history of the land. So my question being is like, how much do we reinvent the wheel because it's unique to us, the land is unique to us, the people are unique to us, versus learning from, say, a nation that has already maybe done part of the work. And given that there's still a lot of work to do, arguably so, that's my question for who would like to answer that on the panel.
I think, do you want to start, Sam?
I'm conscious that Dean should probably answer that question, but I just had a reflection, and it goes to Johnny, who I'm sure is known to you, who founded the Trans-Tasman Business Council. He invited me on Monday to an important event in Canberra to welcome the New Zealand Prime Minister on his first Australian visit. It was a business delegation put on by the Trans-Tasman Business Council. And there was a welcome to new Prime Minister, put on by a Ngambri Ngunnawal elder outside the front of the New Zealand High Commission with smoking ceremony. It was a beautiful ceremony, Johnny, that everyone participated in. A lot of business people from Australia, I think, created what was going on, who hadn't been to a proper smoking ceremony. But the New Zealand Prime Minister stood with the High Commissioner to Australia, the Dame Annette, and they stood looking at the Aboriginal welcome in absolute honour and respect for being on this country or that country in Canberra. And it was a long ceremony, and everyone was smoked. And then in return, the New Zealand delegation, led by the Prime Minister, sang in Maori, not the national anthem, but it's a. Thank you. Yeah, that's right. And it was just this moment where these two cultures were respecting each other's fundamental part of how we come together in Canberra for that meeting. And then when we went into the business delegation, and those that hadn't been exposed to either, changed the way they communicated and sat and listened and shared their insights with the Prime Minister. That conversation was materially altered because of that shared moment of both very, very beautiful and generous welcoming and then a response. But I would say, and I'm going to leave it to others to answer this, we can't learn that from New Zealand. We have a very specific, you're hearing about the specific country issues for First Nations Australians. And the story of New Zealand is very, very different to the story of Australia. I can't speak to that, and I think you should probably do that.
I'm more than happy to.
But I think it's important. But the reason I shared that
We'll
was
get a microphone,
to
Ben.
watch. It united us in a way in that we need to be doing this better, and New Zealand does in some respects. But our country story in that moment was important back the other way. So this is, I think that's, we need to keep doing our uniquely Australian and listening to Aboriginal leaders.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Whilst I give respect to the Māori, I also acknowledge that the Māori call us Moi Moi Rā. We are the Dreamtime people. We are the big brothers. The Māori people, they come from Hawaii. They are warrior people. And anybody who come in contact with their land, they would stand and say, "You muck with me, I'll cut your head off and it'll be on my stick." That's exactly what their haka's about. What did Aboriginal people do when the first fleet arrived? Our arms were open and we welcomed them. It was my great-great-great-great-grandfathers that welcomed the first fleet. When they had scurvy, when they were malnourished, when their women couldn't breastfeed their children, our women did. We did not stand there and fight. We welcomed them, we fed them, and that's the difference. Our land was claimed as terra nullius. Our grandfathers and our forefathers were dismissed, disregarded, displaced and detached. Let me tell you one other thing. I am the first to be born free on my mother's side. She was stolen, as was her mother, as was her mother, as was her mother. And most of my brothers and sisters and cousins and, you know, mob in the room can understand. Many of you might know somebody who's stolen. So let me just tell you that Australia was very different. The government done such a great job in making sure that our culture did not go on. I am a product of the formula that was used to eradicate my people. That's the difference between Australia and New Zealand, with all due respect to Aotearoa. But our fight is different. We are different. But us now, we're still here saying, "Hey, come, listen, learn, we'll still feed you. We'll still welcome you." That's who we are. We are caring, sharing people. And this is what I'm saying. We are here to share this culture of this land with you, so that you and your children and your children's children for the next 7 generations down the line have the right to inherit the inherent right to fresh water, to clean air and to food. That is our obligation. And if we don't take care of country, country won't take care of us. So I just want to respectfully say that from my people, my family, yeah.
Thank you, Benelli. Thank you. And for that, I think a beautiful invitation for us all to reconnect. Thank you. Yeah. No, we need more of that passion in corporate Australia.
Well,
Yep.
and that's part of the story, isn't it? Because I think I mean, that's a much better way than I was going to say it. Probably I'm not going to be blunter. Because I think that we often do, it's a classic corporate model. What works there must work here. and we're looking for shortcuts all the time. But the journey here is different. But I also think the journey here is much more extraordinary as a consequence, if we get that right. But the journey here is different. But it requires a different way of listening. And I love Sam's story there about that, about frankly, the awkwardness of the Australian delegation not knowing what the hell to do there. That's the story of us on the global stage. We are an embarrassment to ourselves, frankly, as a nation, because we don't know how to deal with that. We don't know how to deal with the strength of that story or the truth of that story. We don't know how to deal with it. And the voice, the referendum, is part of that conversation. It should go without saying which way I will vote, but that doesn't mean I'm confident in it succeeding, because I don't trust this nation. I don't trust the people of this nation to know what's the right thing for them, because they never have, and that it's difficult for them to come into it, which is not to say anybody here, just to reflect largely on the state of the nation. But so there's two parts. The other question that sits behind that, and I just want to make sure I bring it back to something optimistic. The other part of the invitation, I think, to your question is not just what's our journey, but is there a sort of an idea here about what we can learn from other countries, and how might that be adapted? And I think there is truth to that. There is truth in the idea that our culture is the oldest culture. It is the oldest culture on the planet. You know, when I say, you know, when we go yellow, I don't mean this always was Aboriginal. What I mean is since time immemorial, our people have walked this country. You know, 5 generations versus 2,500. It's not 5,000 versus 2,500. It's 5. It's 5 versus 2,500. It's impossible to count them on the number of toes and hands or fingers I've got. There's no way of calculating the difference in that story. So there's an idea there about what's laying in there for you, what that journey is, and how do we capture it. So we don't know and as a consequence of that, and I know this sounds like a bad plug for that report that's on your table, but as a consequence, the world is asking us how to solve these challenges with them. The world is asking Aboriginal Australia, what do we do about climate change? What do we do about our relationships to Indigenous knowledge? We hold that. You try to have that conversation here, and they get the boardroom conversation, the people sit around staring awkwardly at you. But the rest of the world's asking us for this question, but not this country. And we hold universal knowledge. You know, we talk about, you know, my grandfather, who we were just referencing before, talks about the idea of the 7 spirit families coming from this country. You know, in our law, wherever your home is from here, by the way. We believe we're the first peoples of the world, and there's some strange evidence around those particular points. It's not a claim of archaeological evidence. I'm talking here about the idea of where does the earth begin, how do we come back to wholeness? Blood integrity, I mentioned that Mary mentioned my business, if you like. Integrity in that word is not just about ethics, it's about the idea of wholeness. How do we bring things into wholeness? That's the journey that's available to us. It's not a us and them or a future of this, it's a wholeness journey. And we can be the most extraordinary nation on the planet if we understand that the assets of this country aren't laying below the soil. They've always been sitting on top of it, curating that soil. That's the asset we've been missing.
Yep. Thanks, Deen. We'll just have our last question. Yep.
Well, I guess it's both a question and a statement. So I'm just a nobody who lives in the suburbs, right? But I trace my ancestry back to some of the first people who were brought here as convicts. So I can say my great, whatever it is, grandparents came here as first settlements. I want to publicly honour the first people of this nation because they are people that made us what we are. I think people, all of us who are sitting here today, to think about what we want to be as a nation and whether we want to acknowledge the past and acknowledge that there are people who need to be part of Australia that have not been acknowledged, and yet they have a place and a history that created what each and every one of you are and where you live. This election that's coming up for the voice, I hate that term. The voice is going to be not just what do we want to be, but what we are. I want you to think about that. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to vote. It's probably painted the obvious. We can be a better nation because of what you are and what you can contribute. And I thank you.
Thank you. Well, what a really wonderful and powerful way to end. So thank you for everybody's kindness and beautiful emotion in solving what are very complex and challenging discussions. In kind of closing out, I know your first action should be get on board and come along with Anne and onto the program. And then just really quickly, just another action just from each. So people leaving today, Sam. So one, they're going to join and get on board in the great work that Tanya has put together. But what's the second kind of quick action that we can all take? And then I'll ask Deen and Anne and Sally.
I have no idea how to answer that question. I would say, just in response to that extraordinary and beautiful and generous sharing, no one is a nobody. So you're not a nobody from the suburbs. I guess I just reflect on the fact that this is what this work does. Once we're grounded, you can bring forth your whole self. And that's a gift which we keep seeing in today's discussions. And we've got to be better at doing that in the environments where people are scared and are fighting back because of their own lack of knowledge and their own engagement. But it's a big system change we're part of because there's lots of that other stuff that we're being asked to confront, and particularly for the women in this room. A woman's voice is also a voice that's often treated as not relevant and bringing different truths and often dismissed. And I just think I'd leave here as women particularly, and the great men in the room, to know that women want to have those voices. But we're not going to try and copy men or be men in doing that. We're bringing forth our perspectives too, and to have the courage to do that. And if you're at all worried about when you do that, you've got hundreds of women who will tell you afterwards how great you are and why it's powerful for you to do that. So you've got us all holding your back. But I guess it's to take the lessons of today and see if you can incorporate it, and you're not alone.
Yep. Thank you, Sam, and thank you for leading the trip last year, but all the amazing work that you do across government and women. So thank you. And Deen?
Two quick things, two quick actions. It won't surprise anybody, because I would have told you that the action I'd like you to take is to tell the country. And that doesn't mean, by the way, as I say, travelling out west or up north or anywhere other than your own front yards, that everywhere in this country is sacred. That's the other difference to our nation. For 100,000 years, every single inch of that soil and that dirt has been loved and cared for and curated and has something to tell you wherever you are. Just sit there. It'll talk to you. When it does, your relationships with the world will change. That's action number one. Do it this afternoon. Action number two is also to acknowledge, I think, what Sam just spoke to, that know that for Aboriginal Australia, your voices are important. Remember, I said at the top of our conversation that women are the centre of our law systems, our family systems, our cultural systems. We're here to support you. We are part of that story. Our women's voices are powerful. They don't need to be. We've never sought to moderate them or challenge or corral them. They are voices that should be championed, that should be heard, as should yours. That's what our culture's about. So the only other action I've got to that is to say that's what we're here for too.
And I do think, Deen, I want to give your report a plug. So on the tables, there's a copy, but you can also go to the Deloitte website and pull your report. If you are on a learning journey and some of this is new and you're still wanting to learn how this all interacts, and actually has a cross section of country culture and capitalist culture. It is a fantastic read, and it's very transformational. Mine's sitting on my lap and it's got lots of doggies because I've read it, so many times. So please take that away as well. Anne?
I don't really know where to start either, other than to say, just when you think you know what you're doing, you have moments where you realise that there is still lots of shifting that we need to do. And I think today's lunch has been one of those moments for many people in the room, including me, despite having had lots of connection in different ways. There are things that I don't claim to know, and I realise today my depth of lack of understanding in a way. So the opportunity, I guess, And the reason for doing the tours is for us all to learn. And the greatest gift we can give each other, and I think the thing that we need to continue to think about if we, as we call ourselves leaders, is that we are hungry to learn and hungry to understand, and we take the opportunity and the time to do that. And I guess today, if anything, has made me reflect more on the importance of that. And I think these sorts, what we're trying to pull together, I guess, is that it's not the only opportunity everyone will have, but it's an opportunity for people to dive into that in a way that they may not ever otherwise get the opportunity to do.
Thank you, Anne. And Sally?
I mean, this has been the craziest experience. I feel like I've been on a journey. I just wanted to thank both of the two people that asked questions and spoke, just for your vulnerability and passion. I think you injected something kind of meaningful, and you reminded us it's kind of life and death, right? It's not just some kind of theoretical discussion that we're having, and it kind of impacts all of us. I'm a migrant. I'm sure many of you are. So the history of this country kind of is unfolding, and it's astonishing. I think what I heard, and maybe you can tell me if I'm right, but was a real welcoming and a real invitation to relationship. And maybe you said one thing actually, which was, kind of boardroom table to dining room table. So that's my action. Boardroom table to dining room table. I'm going to invite someone to dinner. I mean, it's an incredible thing, and I think it's an invitation. So,
Now that I think about that.
Would you like to? Yeah. So, oh no. So please join me in thanking Sam, Deen, and Sally. And to close off, we're going to have two amazing ways to end our fantastic journey that we have been on over time. I'm going to invite Binawee to do an Indigenous closure, and then Susan Massasso will do a thank you and final closing. So we'll be just closing in a couple of minutes, but yeah, we can leave as the panel. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Do you want to go on? Yeah, you just stand there. Yeah. Thanks. Easy.
Hello. Just following customary law, as a custodian of this country, of Gadigal country, as the law of reciprocity, and I came here as Marianne's guest, and as a way to say thank you for what I have learnt. Thank you for your energy and for allowing me to come and join your luncheon today. I want to say thank you to Tanya and to all of the panelists, to everybody that spoke, to everybody in this room, to all of the people, the caterers, the organisers. A big thank you to you. So big thank you. So in our culture, we don't have a thank you. We don't have a word for goodbye. What we have songs. And they talk about new beginnings, and they talk about, when you leave this land, may our ancestors guide you back to where your land is, back to your home. We have songs that say thank you, basically. Even though there's no words for thank you, we have songs that basically show our appreciation and our gratitude for what you have shown for us or what we have learned from you. So that's what this song is about. It's actually about the new beginnings, and it's about farewelling the old and welcoming the new, but also as you're welcoming the new and you're traveling home, that you're being blessed and you're being taken care of by the spirits of the land, the ancestors. So here it is. If I could get you to close your eyes, because in Aboriginal culture, we deep listen and we deep learn. It's a different kind of listening and a different kind of learning. So I want you to listen deeply here. Feel it. Mbaye gengara, mbaye gengara, lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere, lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere, baya bungara, oh lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere, oh lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere, oh Baye bungara, lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere, lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere. Baye bungara, Baya bongara. Lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere. Lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere. Oh. Mogara warambai darabai mogara warambai darabai mogara warambai biri 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 mogara warambai biri 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 biri. Maya bongara, Maya bongara, lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere, lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere. Baya bongara, Baya bongara, oh lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere, lo nyoro nyoro na mere mere. Go, go. Gunnar Gilmore. Can I all have you say Yano? Yano. That means I'll see you next time. If not in the physical world, I'll see you all in the dream time. I'll take it. While I dance.
That is a very difficult act to follow. Let us acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Camaragal people of the Eora Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since women and men awoke from the great dream. We honour the presence of these ancestors who reside in the imagination of this land and whose spirituality continues to enrich us. We pay our respects to the elders, both past and present. So it is great pleasure that I do the vote of thanks today. You've all been amazing. I think some of you that weren't involved in previous tours just got a taste of the crazy ass magic that occurs. I don't know that Marianne wrote the plan for this panel to quite play out in that way. My name's Susan Massasso. I've done a bunch of stuff in life, but at the moment I'm part of a great group of women, and I'm really proud to be here today. And I'd like you to go along with me and thank this super impressive guest speakers we've had today. Anne, Sam, Deen, it was a pleasure hearing from you all, and Sally. I'd also like to extend my thanks to the equally impressive folks that were from last year's tour. Marianne, Layla, Sally, Caroline, Yatu for sharing their insights with us. There are so many critical issues facing us as people, as a nation and a planet. And we have so much to learn or unlearn from new and old thinking. Taking time to hear that wisdom from others and from such people like we've had today is so crucial and critical in helping us tackle all those issues as we really reimagine what life can be like. I'm a mother of 3 teenage sons, and like Anne said, it's amazing how they seem to get it a lot more than us, and they're helping us become better people. And so I'm sure we can also learn from the longest continuous culture in the world how to be better people and better residers on this planet. A big part of our focus for the next tour, I think we all agree the why. We all agree reconciliation, sustainability, innovation are all crucial and important. We get that, that's why we're here. We also want to add, well, what's the what and the how? How do we turn this purpose into practice? How do we have a bias for action, and how can we be part of the solution, not just increase our knowledge? So I think hope is a big part of that. I don't want to leave this tour and be quite disaffected by how hard it's going to be. There is hope. There is the ability to do this. It's just not going to be easy. And I think it's achievable for us to reimagine what our Australia should be like. So Anne, Sam, Deen, Marianne, Sally and Robin, we'd like to present you with a token of thanks from us today. The circle embraces the Indigenous cultures of the 3 countries in which it's based, Australia, New Zealand and Singapore. This image is a creative interpretation of the traditional attachment to water and land, so vital to each. The print has been created by Circle's creative director, Thea Weiss, an Australian printmaker and artist. They're each one of a kind, they're numbered, they're very, very special. And on behalf of myself, Commonwealth Bank Private and the Circle, we'd like to thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you to your next event. So, now a little bit of housekeeping. Visitor badges, we want them all back, so make sure you don't take them home. The flowers on the table are gifts, so please take them in the vases they're at. Thank you, Marianne, for helping. And a special thank you to Robin and the Commonwealth Bank Private team for hosting today. I'm sure that Tanya sucked you in with, oh, there might only be about 50 people. And before long, there's about 150. So thank you so much, Robin.